love having a wide array of watercolors to choose from, but sometimes having too many options on our palettes can be more frustrating than not having enough. This series focuses on extremely limited palettes of just 2 or 3 colors and how they work together in a painting. In this video, we are going to be exploring a whimsical duo of colors, Manganese Violet and Cobalt Green Deep. But right off the bat, I have to apologize to the viewer who suggested the inspiration for this video. Renee Chelsea on Instagram suggested PV15 and PG18, which many of you know are Ultramarine Violet and True Viridian. In my Patreon poll, her suggestion came in too close to call alongside one of my ideas for Shadow Violet and Cobalt Green Deep. I wanted to merge these two ideas together by choosing the lighter violet and the darker green for a wide range of values overall. The problem is, I had a complete lapse in brain function that I didn't catch until I was completely done filming and editing the footage. I pulled Manganese Violet PV16 instead of Ultramarine Violet PV15. I am so sorry, Renee, that I fumbled things up here, but I hope you all love this duo nonetheless. As I mentioned, the original idea that I had was to use one of my favorite colors, Shadow Violet, from Roman Schmal specifically, but Manganese Violet will end up brightening up this palette in a much needed way. PV16 is a semi-transparent, granulating red-violet pigment. Notably, it is among the most light-fast of violet pigments in watercolors. If I had properly used Renee Chelsea's suggestion of Ultramarine Violet, PV15 has very similar qualities, only it is blue-violet instead of red-violet. Viridian, made with PG18, has a very low tinting strength and value. It makes a lovely gray, as Renee Chelsea mentioned, when combined with either of these violets. However, while I don't shy away from a challenge, I was concerned that the lack of dark values would make a full-size painting with this pair land a bit flat. Instead, I opted for one of my favorite single pigment greens, Cobalt Green Deep, made with PG26. PG26 is a light-fast, opaque, granulating bluish green with a much lower chroma than something like a phthalo green. It isn't as versatile as that phthalo green, but it is a very lovely addition to an earthy palette. The first row of our expanded swatching shows PV16 and PG26 mixed together in different ratios. There is more of the Manganese Violet in the 3 leftmost boxes, and more of the Cobalt Green Deep in the 3 rightmost boxes. One of many reasons I was so willing to sacrifice my own beloved Shadow Violet and find a happy middle ground for this particular episode is that these two colors make a hue quite similar to Shadow Violet when we mix them together. This mixture doesn't provide the same granulation pattern as Roman Schmal's version, but opting for the lighter violet will allow for that much brighter range of values overall. Serendipitously, but unknown to me at the time of filming this video, is that Shadow Violet will actually make an appearance in our next limited palette series video. Be sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss that one, and you can also join us over on Patreon if you would like to join us for the community challenge during August using that palette. The second and third rows of these swatches are value scales of the two colors on their own. This is to help us get a more robust understanding of what we'll be working with within the actual painting. This version of Manganese Violet is from Stone Ground Paint Co. in Canada, and the Cobalt Green Deep is from Winsor & Newton. I thought I'd mix things up this time by painting a Jaguar Eye instead of the usual human eye that we've been doing so far in this series. I'm starting off with my Vinci Casaneo brush, which has less of a fine tip and helps me to work in loose washes. In a couple of recent videos, I think I accidentally labeled this as a size 8, but it's actually a size 6. I just wanted to mention that here in case you're watching this one as well. It's a newer brush to me and the sizes run large, so my apologies for any confusion. This size 6 is roughly the same size as my silver black velvet size 8 that you'll see later on in the video. For this eye study, I wanted to work mostly with the two colors on their own until we get to the darker spots later on. The iris of the eye is green, of course, and then we'll use violet for the rest of the surrounding fur. One thing I particularly love about Cobalt Green Deep is how it dries. I'm not sure if this is just the Winsor & Newton version that I am most familiar with, or if it's consistent across other brands, but when you drop it into a wash like I did for the iris, it has this ability to look like it's still floating across the water, even after it dries. You'll be able to see this both in this study and then later on as the background of the full painting, and I just think it looks so pretty. As I mentioned before, we're going to be mixing both colors together, mixed together in their mass tone as strong as I can get them. We get this nice, rich black for the spots in the skin around the Jaguar's eye. In hindsight, I probably should have added another layer of the violet, laying in details over the darker values before placing the spots. I just got too excited and impatient to use those lovely dark colors and got ahead of myself. The reason it would have been better for me to add the contouring details first is that going back in between the spots with this lighter value and using more water has a tendency to lift those heavier layers of paint. As I paint around them, it also makes for a clunkier wash that doesn't look as natural. Something to keep in mind for next time. Okay, here's the thing. I was just commenting in my last video about painting so many birds. However, one of my patrons on our Discord server painted a pigeon earlier on during the challenge month, and the color pairing was just way too perfect to ignore. So thank you to Petite Flower for giving my brain the mental permission to paint more burbs. That being said, I didn't want to subject you to another bird as the larger painting for this video. So here he is as a little pocket pidge. I started by placing some isolated washes so that we didn't lose those little pops of pure color. This was done on the neck of the bird, which naturally has those green and purple iridescent feathers. But you know I love me a good gray, so I was more than happy to play with the mixtures between those two colors. I also think that this study shows off the different ways that you can paint with a mixed gray in watercolors, especially if that gray includes at least one granulating pigment. Allow me to explain. On the head, I used controlled brushstrokes using a moderate amount of paint, but then picking the excess water up using a damp brush so the paint did not have a chance to pool or puddle. The result is a fairly uniform gray wash. On the chest, I used lots of water to dilute the gray. Doing so suspends those pigment particles further away from each other, allowing us to see the granulation more clearly. The result is a wash that looks gray at a glance, but on further inspection, you can see gentle touches of the violet and green separately. Finally, on the wings, we can see that dark mixture of concentrated color. This will end up being as close to mass tone as I can get while still being able to paint without a dry brushing effect. Since there is very little water present, the result is a near black color. However, even though it looks black, it still has a beautiful liveliness to it that is missing from something like a single pigment ivory black. I'm not sure if that subtle color comes across on camera or not, but it is such a nice little detail in person. After those first washes are down, I did switch over to my silver black velvet brush to work on some of the details like the ruffles in the chest feathers and more definition on the flight feathers. At the very end of this page, I added some white highlights to both little studies using Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleedproof White with a silver golden natural size 12 Ultraround brush. I think the pigeon makes an especially cute design for a sticker. What do you guys think? As always, the scans from this video and a complete companion post are available over on Patreon if you'd like more information. For the full painting in today's video, I really struggled to decide on a subject. I didn't know whether or not to go with highlighting the gray colors or the pure colors. I still have a lot of really cool ideas that I want to try using negative painting in this color pairing, but today I opted for something that I was a bit more confident that I could pull off to showcase what these colors are capable of. I was leaning towards a gray cat, but that would implement a lot of the same techniques that we just talked about with the pigeon. So to show you something different, I decided to go with a hairless cat, because why the heck not? Approaching the reference image and only using two colors, I wanted to start off by designating which of these colors and mixes would be used for what. I decided to use the Manganese Violet for the lighter mid-tone values of the skin, leaving the white of the paper for the lightest values. We'll circle back to our other values in just a few moments. This painting started off really strong. I actively enjoyed this first initial wash of the Manganese Violet, and I was so happy with how loose I was able to keep everything since I have a tendency to get a little bit detailed too early on. But here I was able to suggest the curves of the body without getting too caught up in those little details. As a pigment, the Manganese Violet is also just super lovely in this loose wash. There are areas of deeper concentration where more of the violet tones and granulations come out to play, but we also have these areas of light pink that drift across the paper and feel very light and airy. Coming back to the face, I'm introducing our first mixed color. Alongside the pure green that I used for the irises, I'm placing the darker midtones of the face and ears using Cobalt Green Deep mixed with just a little bit of Manganese Violet. Using these cooler green tones for the darker values contrasts not only in value, but also with the color temperature against the warm purples. I'll continue laying in these more delicate values to carve out the facial features, but do note I am still using that Casaneo brush so that I don't get too hyperfixated on any one particular area. Another thing I wanted to share with you in this video is how important it is to keep the washes on your palette active when you are using granulating pigments. Here is a look at my palette at this stage of the painting. You can see that the heavier pigment particles settle to the bottom of the washes fairly quickly. Running a brush through these particles disrupts where they are settled and reincorporates them into your wash. If you want to keep those granulating washes nice and smooth, make sure to swirl around your brush before going back to your painting. And if you need a moment of peace and quiet during your day, you can just play around with these washes in your palette lid. It's like a little colorful wet Zen garden. In general, I really enjoy painting wrinkled skin. I literally do not tire of painting rhinos. However, when you're working on those larger areas of smooth skin, it can be really challenging to include the right amount of detail. This is why it's so difficult to paint subjects like young children and babies with very smooth skin. For this painting, I continued with that greenish mix I was using on the rest of the face and ears to start plotting out where some of the wrinkles will be. The goal was to provide these small areas of gentle transitions between the smooth skin and the deeper wrinkles. After working on the little forehead wrinkles, I moved back to the broader picture of the face, placing both the green mixture and the violet in washes to merge the lighter and darker midtones into a more cohesive wash. I'll continue using this technique throughout the rest of the body, but unfortunately, I don't feel like I executed it as well as I would have liked to in the rest of the painting. In the Jaguar Eye, the study of the focus was using these colors separately. In the Pigeon study, it was to use the colors in various shades of gray. For this larger study, my intention was to use the colors mostly on their own, but layered on top of each other to implement a glazing technique. However, the problem was that the values are so light throughout the body of this cat that there isn't a huge color shift when you layer the diluted green over the diluted violet. It just looks green. We end up with mostly areas that are just one color or the other, which is fine, but I'm just bummed I couldn't show you another successful painting technique in this particular painting. Returning to the face, I am back in my happy zone once again of painting portraits. In the reference photo, the cat's muzzle is black, so here I did end up mixing the green and the violet together to get that really dark neutral color. Everything is going smoothly according to plan until we get back to those wrinkles again. I laid this wash on a little bit too heavy, and this is where we start to slip downhill. I still like how the painting turned out, I just think that these wrinkles could have been handled a little bit more eloquently. Much like skipping that extra wash on the Jaguar Eye before putting in the spots, I should have done another transition layer to ease the dark values in more gradually. Oh well, it is still great practice and there is always a lesson to be learned. And I still had a really great time. I particularly loved the moments of gray across the cheeks and over the nose, and the eyes were surprisingly fun to paint despite how small they are. They have such a strong shape, and I love the glazing in the left eye specifically. The toes were definitely a huge challenge. Usually you don't see a cat's claws when they are at rest because they're retracted. However, when they don't have any hair, it's a lot easier to see what's going on under there. If you look really close at the reference photo, you can actually see that there's a division between the skin on top of the foot and the pads underneath, which is pretty cool. In addition to the dark wrinkles, or maybe because of them, you'll also see that I added line work to this piece. This is a bit unusual for me because frankly, I am terrible at line art skills. However, I wasn't sure if I wanted to add a background or not at this point. So in order to do a little control save, I added the line work and then scanned in the painting into the computer before continuing. But alas, my friends, fear not. Aside from the face, the background was the most fun to paint, as I could really let the watercolors run wild once more. And real talk, I don't even know what I was thinking before I started the background because this painting absolutely needed a background, especially showing off this color pairing. This background mixture is obviously mostly cobalt green deep, but there is still some of the manganese violet in there that we will be able to see more of as the wash dries. I made sure to use plenty of water around the edges of the wash so that we could get that really beautiful flowing texture that I mentioned earlier with the Jaguar Eye study. Once again, I just have to say that I feel like PG26 is a very well-behaved pigment. It has such a nice balance of stays where you put it and softens off nicely. For me at least, it lets me have fun with those loose wet washes without ever feeling like I'm ever out of control of my painting. As we finish up here, I wanted to show you this month's artwork over on Patreon. The sticker for this month is one of the finches that we painted in the last limited palette series video, and the print is a special 8x4" print of a green heron using my Embrace Opacity palette. If you don't want any physical rewards but still want to join in on those limited palette challenges before they hit YouTube, there's also a tier for that. The August challenge is already underway, and I'm so excited to see everyone's paintings. Thank you so much to my amazing patrons. Thank you so much for trusting me with these videos. I'd love to hear what you think about this limited color palette, so let me know what it inspires you to paint in the comments below. I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you found it helpful. I appreciate you watching all the way until the end, and I will see you all in the next video. Until then, happy painting!